let's go! 9, let's go, time!
Ashley's like, not enough. Not enough times.
Hey guys, welcome to Barbell Shrugged. Here with
no beard having.
Damn, I forgot. I'm supposed to cover
Covered
this.
up.
Yeah. Here with my co-host Doug Larson. Chris Moore couldn't make it today, unfortunately, but we have an empty microphone to represent where Chris normally would sit.
Since you shaved your beard, he won't talk to you.
That's right. He actually refuses to be on the podcast due to me being beardless. We have Max El-Hag on today. Individualized programming extraordinaire. If you want someone to write you a program specifically for your needs, he's the type of guy that you want on your side. And we're going to go into a little bit of that, and we're also going to talk about. He's going to talk a little bit about individualized program design, but also break down Fran for us. We had a staff meeting at Faction earlier today, and he held the staff training, and he showed all of our coaches how he would approach improving an athlete's Fran time. And we thought it was really insightful, and we thought you guys would enjoy hearing about it. So,
and we're going to talk about all that after
you go to barbellshrugged.com and sign up for the newsletter.
It's like 3 episodes in a row I've had to remind Mike. He gets distracted. There's a lot going on in that brain.
I get excited easily. Very excited about things that most people would never get excited about, I don't think. Because of all the cool things we do, so you should sign up for the newsletter.
There you go. So you've been on the podcast one time before on episode 63.
Oh yeah,
that's right. And so if you haven't seen the show, or if you're watching this right now and you haven't seen episode 63, and so you're not familiar with Max, can you at least go through some of your background, some of your history, and kind of tell a little bit about how you got into the CrossFit world and about some of your credentials, so to speak. That way, people are familiar with why they should even pay attention to this episode and listen to what you have to say.
Yeah, for sure. So, like most people that get into competitive CrossFit from the early or from an early start. Was an ex-athlete myself, played football and wrestled pretty much my whole life. Went to
You got that grin on your face. CTP's cracking up. Me and Max
I'm so confused. CTP's over there dying. I have no idea why he's dying.
He's cracking up behind the camera.
So I can't stop laughing.
I asked Mike, I gave him the okay to make sure the audio was going, and then Mike shoots me a thumbs up. That makes me think about Mike's thumbs up video.
Okay, so
derail.
Will you come look at this real quick, CTP? Make sure we're recording.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, good.
All right.
Sorry, Max.
Yeah, no.
So the audience is aware, we just recorded 20 minutes of a show.
This is the second time through this.
Yeah, we're trying to do this again because we just recorded 20 minutes of a show and then had to stop and start over because we weren't recording all the microphones.
It was CTP's fault.
All right, so one more time, Max, tell us about yourself and why you're so smart.
That's a weird question, but all right. So I was an athlete pretty much my whole life: football, wrestling. Went to college to play those sports. I was actually a finance and accounting major. Got out of college, got into just fighting mostly, but I'd always researched endocrinology and strength conditioning and anatomy and physiology textbooks, and it's kind of just been my passion my whole life because I was an athlete. Dad was an athlete. Mom was in a nutrition company, so it's kind of like the thing I always did on the side and was always passionate about, but was never convinced I could make a living doing. Slowly got into the CrossFit world through MMA. As conditioning for that, competed a little bit, did all the level 1 certification seminar stuff, USAW, CSCS, Poliquin education, private sector education, endocrinology, courses at community college as prerequisites to get into programs that I have been putting off deciding whether or not I was going to go and pursue to try to figure out, kind of what postgraduate education I do want to pursue. And then worked for OPT for 2 years, doing a lot of design work for my athletes and games athletes and helping with educational curriculum and all that stuff, which I guess leads me to today.
So you've had a big background in program design, making both coursework, so to speak, like designing educational products on how to write programs, and then also you've written, literally thousands probably of programs for individual people, focusing on exactly where they need to improve and get better.
Yeah. So I guess my expertise, so to say, is programming individual athletes. So I take an athlete, assess them, and work directly with them with a one-on-one program. So a lot of people...
And before we get too far in,
yeah.
You're no longer with OPT.
No.
So
Yeah.
You wanted to make that clear.
Yeah, so I'm just on my own right now, kind of doing my own thing, doing my own coaching. Had great experience there, learned a lot from James. It's it was a political split, and I'm just independent now. So my expertise in program design, basically just I came from always working one-on-one with athletes, like pretty much from the time I got in CrossFit, always did my own program design or hired a coach to do my program design for me, because I believe in having a coach when you are working towards something and should be working on your weaknesses versus somebody else's. And then OPT's business model is very, prevalent and heavy in one-on-one coaching. So obviously fell into that and continued on programming for people as a extension of personal training in the past.
And so in CrossFit, there's a lot of different ways that you can go about like getting into that world and improving your fitness and getting to a competitive level. There's doing it on your own with no coaching, just following a blog, which is the free thing, but it's also kind of like the level 1 thing that's only going to get you so far. And then there's joining a gym and just doing the group fitness class, the same thing that everybody else is doing. And that's kind of like a little more expensive, and it's a little bit better. And then beyond that, there's like, I have these very specific goals. I want to specifically get better at longer workouts, or I want to specifically gain muscle mass, or I want to specifically improve my Olympic weightlifting. So I can follow a skill specific or a goal specific program that's still general, and that's usually a little more expensive, but a little bit better. And then kind of the gold standard is getting truly individualized coaching, where you're getting an assessment and your movement is being analyzed by a coach who knows you, knows your background, knows your level of experience, and knows your mobility levels, and they're going to be able to write a program specifically for you that's going to make you a better athlete as fast as possible. And that's usually the most expensive, but also the best thing. And kind of that whole spectrum. Level 1 being the easiest to come by and like the easiest to find coaching for, because there's thousands of blogs out there. And then level 1 coaching, that requires the most experience from the coach and the most commitment from the athlete. So there's a whole spectrum there. And so primarily you have focused on the high end stuff.
Yeah.
It requires the most experience and the most commitment, and you're usually targeting people that have very specific goals and that are very, very motivated.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where your expertise lies.
Yeah, for sure. So I don't, most of my client base doesn't come to me and need me for motivation or getting them to work harder or work on the little things. They're coming to me because they have a goal, and this is one of their highest priorities in life to accomplish it. And it's not necessarily, I want to win the games. It could just be, I want to change my fitness and make it a number 1 priority in my life, and compete in the opens and be healthy and be safe and feel good and kind of be held accountable by someone that's going to specifically program and keep me safe in an environment. And I would argue that there might be one next step up of that is to do all of that in person. Now that would be very expensive.
That's
obviously.
That's your dream scenario.
Oh yeah, my dream scenario is to have like 5 to 10 very high level athletes that pay me a salary every year to work with them and do everything, and work with nutritionists to measure and cook their food and test them every day when they come in, and really make sure that they're getting everything that they can out of their training. Obviously, right now, to be in the sport of fitness or CrossFit, it's generally not going to produce enough income for the athlete to be able to support anything like that. So
I've certainly been to gyms like that before. Like I used to live out in Arizona, which is very close to you, and so you're probably familiar with, since you live in Phoenix, Athletes Performances in Tempe. And those athletes are NFL players and Major League Baseball players for the most part, and so those guys have the means to have that kind of attention where they're getting personal training every single day. Most people can't spend, for ease sake, we'll say $100 an hour, 5-6 days a week, maybe twice a day, and it's going to cost you thousands of dollars per month. Most people don't have that kind of disposable income.
Yeah, and I'd say that probably a lot of the audience really doesn't need that level of detail. A personal program, I think, could benefit any level of athlete. I wouldn't necessarily say it's necessary for all athletes. There should be a certain level of competence in terms of reading a program and picking your weights and knowing all the movements of the things that you want to accomplish, and all of those things should be taken care of before you decide to hire a coach. Now, there's many means to do it. I know a ton of people that learned all the Olympic lifts and all the movements of CrossFit through YouTube and on their own. Now, if you can do that, go ahead. If not, and you're struggling with the Olympic lifts, you might need to go find a coach who can tell you, why are you struggling? Is mobility, shoulders, hips, ankles? Is it speed? Is it technique? But you should have all those things in place before you're paying someone to structure the training response that you're getting, because in the beginning, most of your training response is just skill development. So you should have somebody that's helping you develop your skills, and that's very hard to do remotely. So yeah, that's just kind of an extension of kind of where the niche of remote program design can create success for both the athlete and the coach. Because if athletes come to me that aren't ready for remote design, it sets me up for a really difficult situation to try to fit something in. And oftentimes I turn them away after the initial consultation and say, look, you need to go spend your money in these areas to get these taken care of, and to come back with me with some requisite level of competence in certain things, and then we can start.
And just to clarify, remote coaching means that they're not coming into your gym. You're not dealing with these people one-on-one. They're calling you on the phone. You live in Arizona, they live in Montana, and they're asking you for advice, and you're doing it all remotely, from hundreds of miles away in most cases. So you're not there to actually correct their technique. They need someone in town to correct their technique. And then once all that's handled, then you can write them a program, because they can actually do it once you write it for them.
Yeah, for sure. And you can work around little things, or if somebody's not super proficient, a remote coach should be able to say, look, your hips are rising a little too fast, but the athlete the athlete needs to understand what that means, right? You tell a beginner who's never snatched before, oh, your hips outrace your shoulders, you get too far over the bar, you jump forward. It's like, I could be speaking another language, they have no idea what I'm saying. Right. So generally, the athlete that's coming in for remote program design already has a requisite level of competence in a lot of things that they want to do, and now they need structure and a plan and an ability to go forward and target their weaknesses to make sure that they're prepared for whatever their game day is, whether that be the Opens, or whether that be the regionals, or whether that be the games, or whether it be something completely different, like they fight 2 times a year, or they go do endurance runs, or they want to go on vacation and want to have a six-pack and that's a realistic goal, but that's basically what a remote coach should be doing, or any coach should be targeting those things.
Okay, so someone comes to you and they already have some CrossFit experience, their technique's already relatively solid, they don't have any major restrictions, and they want to take their game to the next level, so to speak. What does that process look like? What happens in that initial phone call? Like, how do you walk them through the process of getting started?
Yeah, so I think in the previous podcast I talked a little bit about the logistics of how remote coaching works. So so if I say initial consultation, you don't know what that means, you can probably go back to the last one and watch it, but we always do an initial consultation. So I sit down, it's usually through Skype. I do have a couple clients in the Phoenix area that I've done them in person with, but I get a feel for the for the client. First of all, we need to get to know each other. I need to know where they're coming from, what their background is, what they want to do, what they want from me as a coach. And a lot of people want a lot of different things from coaches. You'd be surprised. Some people don't want to be bothered. Some people want the accountability. They want somebody to like pester them if they don't complete things. Some people just want the program. And so I get a feel for like the personal stuff.
Are you also trying to figure out if you're going to drive each other crazy? Is that in there somewhere?
Yeah, well, I kind of know right off the bat the people that are going to be easy, or, you know, for the most part, the people that are going to be easy and the people that are going to be a struggle. But I think the people that are a struggle are a good challenge for me intellectually to try to be able to help them achieve their goals, even though we might have personal differences or any of that stuff.
I was trying to throw him a curveball, and he handled that pretty well. Attaboy.
Yeah, so in that initial consultation, I get a feel first for the personal stuff, and then I dig down into the, you know, schedule, lifestyle, nutrition, all the simple stuff, and then we start talking about where they are as an athlete. And most athletes at the level that I'm getting them have some indication of what's limiting them. And I kind of work on a limiting factor model. I say, well, you want to make the games. I say, okay, well, what's stopping you from doing that? Most people have some idea. Some people will just say, I'm not good enough, or I'm not as good as Rich Froning. And I say, okay, well, define that for me. What does that mean? You don't snatch as much as him. You don't clean and jerk. You don't squat. You can't do Fran as fast. You can't do, like, define it for me. And I start to get an indication of what their self-awareness is regarding training, and kind of start to figure out, when I put them through testing, where do I think their priorities are going to lie? Is it going to be in the longer stuff where they have to breathe a lot harder? Is it going to be in the strength-based stuff? Is it going to be in gymnastics? Is it going to be a lot of gymnastics and short, or a lot of gymnastics and long with heavy stuff? And I start to get an indication of a big picture macro view of where they sit. And then from that, I create testing protocols to start to test those things that I theorize will be their limiters. Now, I've gotten that wrong. In the first consultation, I'm like, okay, this guy's more powerful than enduring. He's going to be better at upper body gymnastics pulling than pushing. He's not going to be good at this. He might not be good at this test. And I've been completely wrong. But I test them. I watch them move. I ask them to do like simple things like Turkish get-ups, single arm overhead squats, things that will give me an indication of what their structure looks like and how long their limbs are and why they might be good at certain things. And then I create testing, analyze my testing, create priorities, and then I write the program. So we start on day one. We have the consultation, testing. That whole process after the consult might take 4 to 6 weeks. So they're with me for 6 weeks before I've even written anything specifically for them, other than the testing that is individual towards what I'm looking for. Yeah. And then we go towards sending the program, comments back and forth, learning how to train, learning what we're going after, etc.
Yeah. So now you're going to move to, you're doing this testing and assessment. How would you? Now we're going to kind of move towards like the Fran.
Yep.
You know, how are we going to? Why would you test someone on Fran? I mean, I think there's some obvious reasons on why.
Yeah.
You might. I mean, we'll use it today because everybody wants to have a fast Fran time. Of course, it's the most popular CrossFit workout.
Yeah.
And you kind of took our staff through like how you would assess Fran, and then what you would do. You went into some very general training methodologies that you could use to improve it.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll just put this caveat right up front in the discussion. I don't generally use Fran that much in my initial assessments anymore. Relative to what's being tested in the past Opens, Regionals, and Games for the past 3 years.
So you're not prepping people for Fran.
Yeah.
You're prepping them for the Open, Regionals, and Games. Yeah,
so I try to replicate tests that reflect limiters in those tests versus Fran. I used Fran specifically for the staff, and then also for this podcast, because everyone knows it. It's become like the new what's your bench. It's like, oh, what's your Fran? And you know, it's a great test of power in a mixed modal setting. So I thought it'd be an interesting one to kind of dig into. But if I had tested someone on this, the biggest reason I would pick it is because there's enormous amount of data. There's enormous amount of data of elite females, elite males, then very non-elite females and males, and everything in between. People that move poorly, people that move well, people that are gymnasts, people that are strong power lifters, and you see every derivative of that. So you can always find cross comparisons, and you can say, okay, your Fran time fits in here. This is what people that are accomplishing what you want to accomplish are doing it in. This is how far you are away. So that'd be probably the number one, is that there's so much data. In CrossFit right now, I'd say that the most applicable limiter in this test is probably the ability to do fast pull-ups under somewhat fatigued setting, because that's what's going to separate most people from doing a pretty good Fran from an elite Fran. And if I'm giving a general person something like 21:15:9, I'm assuming that they have an ability to do that kind of work at a relatively high speed, so some power. If I anticipate they're going to do 6+ minutes, then I'm probably not using that as a test. I might use something else for a shorter time frame.
So for the moment, we're going to use Fran as an example. You get a new athlete and you want to just put him through a workout, in this case Fran, just to see how he handles it, see how fast he goes, to see if he does it unbroken, if he doesn't do it unbroken, how he kind of attacks this workout. And then from that, you can look to see where he has limitations, and then you can extrapolate knowledge from viewing that workout to write the rest of his program, along with all the other assessments that you're going to do, because this is just one assessment of many. Yeah.
So if I'm assessing an actual CrossFit athlete, I go into this level of depth with every test that I prescribe, and I prescribe up to like 8 weeks of this. This theoretically would be somebody comes to my door and they say, I want to compete in an event that is only Fran in 8 weeks, and I'm going to do 1 or 2 training sessions a week of just this, and everything else I just don't want to work on. I just want to move well and kind of walk, and that's all I care about. So I'm singularly assessing everything that can affect Fran. What goes into making a great CrossFitter is obviously very different than what goes into just making somebody really good at Fran. And it's probably obvious out there. You can see videos of people that have 2:15 Frans that didn't qualify for regionals. So obviously it's not like a direct barometer of a great CrossFitter. Mm-hmm. It's just one test. Should I just kind of go into like how I'd break it down now?
Yeah, so say you watch someone do Fran,
okay,
and then now you're going to break down the workout that you just witnessed, and you're going to try to figure out what's limiting that athlete. That way you can go fix that problem and they can get better.
Yeah, for sure. So I kind of break it into 4 categories. So we have transition times. I'll do as number 1. I'll just talk about quick, because transition times can't really be changed through program design. The more acclimated you get to a sport and the more knowledgeable you become about a sport, the better you're going to be able to transition from thing to thing. And in triathlons, it happens all the time that people don't transition well, and they don't do as well. In elite triathletes, you watch their transitions, and announcers will always talk about how effective somebody was or how they weren't effective, and seconds can really matter at that level. The same thing's going to be true of CrossFit over time. Mm-hmm. If there's 6 transitions in something like Fran, and you're wasting 3 extra seconds in each of those transitions, you're talking about 18 seconds of wasted time in just the transitions.
And you're talking about the time it takes to get off the pull-up bar and pick up the barbell and back and forth.
And back and forth. And, if you drop the bar and it bounces too far away, and then you jump to the pull-up bar that's too high, or you're using a box and jumping up, all of that little wasted time is, I call transition time. Mm-hmm. It's just the time you finish work in one movement to the next movement. And from a program design perspective, that can't be changed. A coach can just point it out. Like, if I see somebody's video and it's like they did 21 unbroken and 21 unbroken, 15, 15, 9, 9, and they were moving real fast, but they took 15 seconds from getting from the bar to the pull-up bar and back and forth, I'm just going to say, well, the only really way you can get faster at that is transitioning better. Get the bar closer to the pull-up bar, lay it out in a structure that allows you to go from one to the other real fast. But I didn't think there was really much to spend time on that, other than saying that transitions are super important, but they're a function of an athlete getting better at a sport and getting becoming a veteran, right? A quote unquote amateur athlete will waste a lot of time in that. You watch like Jason Kleep or Rich Froning, Annie Thorsdottir, you watch how efficiently they move from one thing to the next. There's very little wasted time, and they're very cognizant of it without, maybe they do talk about it, but without talking about that being a super important part of the sport. Right. It is.
I think the most noticeable place that I see that is where beginners will be doing double unders and they'll be real tired and they'll get done with their last double under. They'll just like throw their rope off to the side and it'll like end up in a big tangled pile. And then all the experiences people that they finish, they calmly lay their rope in a nice little U shape on the ground so they can just step in between it, pick it up, and go again.
Yeah, same with like a kettlebell. People will drop a kettlebell and it bounces off to the side somewhere, and then I've seen people get off the pull-up bars and then they're looking for their kettlebell.
Don't even know where it bounced
It's
to.
like, but you watch the guys that have been training the longest. We stop, we set the kettlebell down, and I set the kettlebell down where I want to, I know where my feet are going to go again. And I want the kettlebell 8 inches in front of where my feet are going to be, where I want to swing.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, that definitely is something that didn't cross my mind the first year I was doing CrossFit. I was too busy slobbering on myself.
Oh man, I was breathing so hard I didn't care about anything else. But as you start to learn about pacing and control, you realize, man, I did the work pretty fast, but I was standing around in between, and then I was, you start to think about that stuff and where you waste time. And those are the easiest things from a beginner perspective that you can improve your times on. The program design and all that stuff, it comes with time, hard work, and smart work. The transition time, all you got to do is think. You got to think and plan and put everything in place and keep composed and within yourself within the workouts, and that should start to cut times off of most things that are in a 4-time setting with a bunch of movements.
And so if that's someone's issue, you basically just say, hey, don't do that anymore. But you don't change their workouts because of it.
Yeah, so I just make them aware of it. Look,
transition PVC pipe.
Yeah, so I might say transition times are something you really need to work on, but it's not a priority when I'm structuring a long-term plan. I'm not saying we're going to go 10 sets of pick up the bar and drop it and grab the pull-up bar and come back and keep that as fast as you can and rest as needed between
I'm going to start programming that. So everyone's going to hate me.
Did your mobility work? How do you transition work?
So it doesn't change the design necessarily. It just kind of is something that people need to be aware of. So as a coach, I just tell them that. And then moving on from, the first thing, the next 3 could be pull-ups, thrusters, or energy systems. And I'm going to keep energy systems relatively simple. I'll just say that it's energy production to working muscles, and an easy way as an athlete is if they're saying things like, man, I just couldn't breathe, or my heart felt like it was going to explode, so I had to step back and calm down. There's a lot of science that goes into what energy systems really mean and how they all work together. But for the sake of the podcast, I'm not going to go into all the minute details of that. I'll just talk a little bit as we go along as to how you can find out in those workouts if it's energy systems versus thrusters or pull-ups.
Right.
Cool?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so when talking about thrusters and pull-ups, you could start off by saying, did they do them unbroken versus did they not do them unbroken? And unbroken just means you completed the entire repetition scheme without stopping. So if you do 10 reps and then you put it down and you do 11, you broke the set of 21 into 2 sets. If you do 21 in a row, it's called unbroken. And unbroken rep schemes, if you force them on people, can be very potent training tools and can be used in a design of themselves. But in an analysis perspective, you can look at if they do them unbroken, there's not that many things you can do to change those 2 movement patterns other than the efficiency of the actual movement. So if it's like a pull-up and they're doing strict pull-ups, then making them faster by doing kipping. Or if they're doing kipping pull-ups, you can make them faster by doing butterflies, which are skill adaptation things. And like I talked about before, those skill adaptation things should be coached or should be learned. They're not necessarily in the program design. I can't say, one butterfly pull-up on the 1 second for 10 seconds to get people to do 10 in a row. I mean, I could write that. If they don't know how to do butterfly pull-ups, it's just, it's just words. So,
so that's technique and maybe mobility work that should be handled on an in-person basis, hopefully, with a coach at their home gym in their town.
Yeah, something like that. And again, it's not a mandatory skill that people should have, that they have to be able to do butterfly pull-ups. Now, it could be a limiter in some workouts. If you're doing a total of 100 reps and you're doing kipping pull-ups and other people are doing butterfly, the speed of those 100 is going to be dramatically different, even if you're doing them all in the same schemes. Like you do 20 and come off, and 20 and come off, and 20 come off, and the person next to you does that same repetition scheme. They're probably going to be faster with the same rest times because the actual work is being done faster. So that skill just needs to be developed either with or without a coach outside of the program design, just like you would learn to do double unders. So if you're going into your group training program and the workout of the day is thrusters and burpees and box jumps, and you walk in and you're like, oh, I know I need to work on double unders today, and you take your rope out and you start doing things, that's not your workout. That's just something you're doing for skill development to make yourself better as an athlete. The workout is something completely separate. So as a coach of design, I'm only focusing on the design. I'm not focusing specifically on the development of skills. I'm focusing a little bit on that when they become the major limitation, but it's never my number one priority for someone. And if it is, I outsource the development of that skill. I find a coach that I trust that can do that and pay them, or the athlete pays them however much their one-on-one sessions are to work that and develop that, because those skills need to be developed.
So if someone really wants to fix their technique, they're not calling you. They need to do that with somebody else. If they want a program written for them, that's what you do.
Yeah, so if they do want technique, they're probably living within a 5-mile radius of me, because they got to see me in person. I wouldn't advise anyone to do technical work with any coach, no matter how much notoriety they have, if the main goal of your program is technique development, unless you have a knowledge base where you can comprehend those things from a distance. Because if let's say Olympic lifting, and somebody says, oh, your hips rise too fast, stay too far over the bar, you don't scoop well enough. If you don't know what that means, it's going to be really hard to kind of do that stuff on your own without oversight. You might be learning worse patterns over time. So I always just say, for skills, work with someone in person. If you have somebody that you really trust that is working with you in person on program design, best case scenario. If you don't have that, or if your gym doesn't offer that and you want that, find a coach that you trust to design your program, and then use your coach in person to help guide you through that program and work on those skills with you.
Yeah.
That does sound pretty ideal.
Yeah. I mean, you're describing an ideal situation for sure.
Cool.
Yeah.
So where was I in talking about the breakdown?
So you went through a few things. You went through the 4 things that you could use to improve your Fran time.
Okay.
If I heard you correctly, was
cool, yeah.
Transition time, squat time, or thruster time rather, pull-up time, and then energy systems development.
Okay.
We skipped over energy systems. You talked a little bit about the pull-ups, and now we're getting into the thrusters.
Okay, cool. And the last thing before I move from, I guess for chin-ups, it can be both strength and muscle endurance if people break them. It also could be energy systems that people need to come off to breathe, or it could be grip endurance. So a lot of that you'll get from the comments and what people say when they finish the workout. Oh man, in the set of 15, I felt my forearms start to tighten up, and then in the set of 9, I was jumping up and doing singles. It's just like I can barely even close my hands. So what a coach should hear from that is that muscle endurance in the grip or in the flexor chain is not adequate enough to supply energy in this mixed modal workout to allow the work to be done unbroken, which is very different from somebody that comes up and they're trying to do a pull-up and they only get halfway up and then fall off, or they're kipping so violently that their hands rips in set 21 and they're kind of swinging back and forth and losing their rhythm. Now we might talk about like lat or scapular strength and put them on a more structured strength program where they're doing eccentrics and jumping over the bar and lowering themselves down and then weighting those, and then strict pull-ups and bent over rows and Cuban presses and isolation work to work on that specifically. So you basically, in the chin-ups, you have speed of contraction, which generally can be solved from going from strict to kipping to butterfly and making those butterfly more efficient. You have strength, which is generally in a CrossFit gym with a lot of pulleys and odd implements. You really only have the pull-up bar and the barbell or dumbbells in a horizontal fashion for pulling to be able to work on that. There's not an enormous amount of exercise selection that you can do to develop lat and scapular strength to assist in something like kipping pull-ups over time.
We were talking the other day, we were discussing the horizontal pulls. We're talking about like sometimes you would prescribe a horizontal pull, but then they don't get that scapular retraction when they pull. They're doing the work of moving the weight, but in a poor manner, so that you're not getting, the result you're looking for.
Yeah.
There's a technique WOD on horizontal pulling where I talk about that in depth if you want to see what that looks like.
Perfect.
Money.
Problem solved.
Yeah,
Man,
good.
we're so on point.
Awesome. Yeah, so watch that video if somebody prescribes horizontal pulling, because I see and have a very hard time coaching the technique of horizontal pulling, especially because it's very common in everyday people now to have rolled shoulders rolled forward and internal rotation in the arms. So when they get horizontal, it stays like that and makes it difficult to pull properly horizontal.
I think it's tough for people too because they can't see it.
Yeah.
They're like, what?
Yeah.
And they're like turning around trying to see. It's like, no, just pull your shoulder blades together.
Like, just do this. And it's a much harder thing to grasp when people don't naturally have that awareness of what's happening in their upper back.
So this is just a few of the things that you're looking for when you're watching this workout as an assessment. You're looking to see if they fall off because they can't hold on because it's their grip, or if they're just simply not strong enough to do any more pull-ups, or if their hips fatigue and so they can't get any momentum on their kip, or on and on and on. You're looking for that weakness is what you're saying?
Yeah, for sure. So when I find that limitation, the program design is different for each one of those individual things. So if somebody has, they can do 45 unbroken kipping pull-ups, but in Fran, their grip explodes and they can't hang on to the bar, I might not be prescribing that many kipping chin-ups to be able to improve Fran. Now, if I'm just talking about improving Fran, I might be doing farmer's walks, a lot of touch-and-go deadlifts, a lot of unbroken kettlebell swing sets, or forcing a lot of work on a fist with some sort of load. Now, a kettlebell is generally never going to be as heavy as the body hanging upside down or hanging against gravity. Body upside down, that'd be weird. The body hanging against gravity on the grip. So generally, a good rule of thumb is that if you're doing farmer's walks, they should be heavy. And that requires some stabilization and scapular strength in and of itself. So if people are weak, you just need to know as a coach, as you're kind of going through that priority list on improving pull-ups, what it is that you have to do to go from one to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. But they're not all the same. And that's what I look for with the limitations.
Yeah, we get people we do that 6-month muscle gain, and people, the priority there is definitely getting stronger and bigger. We've seen some guys put up some better Metcon numbers, like, oh, I PR'd this. It's like, well, if your thrusters and or say your pull-ups, you've gotten, twice as strong on your pull-ups in the last 3 months, all of a sudden, you're just, even if you've gained some weight, you can fly over the bar now, or it'll seem that way, especially when it's short workout like that.
Yeah, for sure. So you'll definitely see some carryover in a lot of people when you develop the strength, that if you're doing a test like this, you might improve, even though somebody with a science background might say, well, you're targeting a strength adaptation and this is a metabolic adaptation that you're going after. It doesn't make sense, but it's only because the limiter in that workout originally was something strength based.
Yeah.
So you could develop that. So when you know what the limit is, it's much easier to target it versus, hey, I'm getting you stronger because that's my goal, is to get you stronger, and it's just a consequence that's nice that you got better at something else.
Yeah. And there was actually a period of time for me personally where I couldn't do pull-ups for about 4 months, so I just did a lot of rows.
Yeah.
And then when I came back, my pull-ups felt amazing.
Yeah.
And I was just like, they were even better. I was like, I should probably pull up less and row more.
Yeah,
so
for
people
sure.
who think about like you got to do more pull-ups to get better pull-ups, not always the case.
Yeah, it's not always the case. I just say that it's a complicated issue in terms of like, are they opens athletes or regionals or games, and how many do you anticipate them having to do in a singular workout? And
Right.
you know, because a skill in any sport is important to have, but you always should be continuing to develop that skill in different ways. And horizontal pulling is great for just shoulder protection in this sport. So it allows people to have healthy shoulders for a long period of time.
Yep. All right, we're going to take a break real quick. When we come back, we're going to talk over the thruster section of Fran.
Mike Bledsoe here with Technique WOD. Today we're going to go over Fran. We typically go over one single movement, but we decided to do a popular benchmark WOD because we podcast with Max El-Hag on our last episode, and we broke Fran down. So if you want to learn more about exactly where your limiter might be, go listen to that podcast, all right? BarbellShrug.com. So Fran, if you don't already know, is 21 reps of thrusters and pull-ups, 15 reps of thrusters and pull-ups, 9 reps of thrusters and pull-ups, as fast as you can. For men, the thrusters are loaded at 95 pounds. For the ladies, 65 pounds. I want to talk a little bit about expectations. The most elite level men are in the low 2 minutes on Fran, so they finish it in 2:15. I've seen, I think someone may have broken 2 minutes, maybe 1:50 something. It's ridiculous. Those guys are doing butterfly. That's for the men. For the ladies, I'm actually not even sure what the most elite times are for women. So now I feel bad. Sorry about that, ladies. You have to go look it up. Then a lot of those guys are doing butterfly pull-ups, which we're going to cover a little bit. If you're doing regular kipping pull-ups, a good time is going to be around the 3-minute range. All right, if you're doing them unbroken. All right, so if you break 10 minutes, if this workout takes you longer than 10 minutes, you need to scale the movement. So you need to either go lighter on your thrusters or you need to scale your pull-ups somehow. We're going to go into that towards the end of the video. All right. So first thing I want you guys to do is we're going to master the thruster. So I have my trusty companion, David here. He coaches here at Faction, and he's probably answering some emails on barbellshrugged.com for you. But we're going to go over the thruster real quick, and I'm first going to talk about mobility, because first off, not only is mobility going to keep you from doing the movement properly and finishing it and making it easy, but it's also going to put you at risk for injury. All right, so the first thing we're going to address is mobility. So go ahead and pick up the bar, David, and I'm going to talk about the squat, all right? Because when you do a thruster, you're going down in a front squat, all right? So if you lack mobility in your ankles, what you may see is someone's heels coming off the ground. So if you're watching someone do thrusters and their heels are coming off the ground, you want to shift forward a little bit, or maybe not. He's like, I don't want to do this and hurt myself. So if you're seeing this, especially at the bottom of the thruster, you know that somebody has, this is more than likely they have an ankle mobility restriction and they need to work on ankle mobility. The thing that they can do best for their Fran time is improve their ankle mobility, all right? Second thing is going to be the hips. If they're not able to get their knees nice and wide, this is not as common as say ankles, But if they can't get their knees wide, it may be A, because of their ankle mobility, or B, because of their hips, okay? So they may need to do some hip external rotation exercises, all right? And then the last thing we're gonna look at is shoulders. So we got ankles, hips, and now we're gonna have shoulders. David's gonna go overhead. Now, right here you can tell he has really good shoulder flexion. What I'm talking about when I say shoulder flexion is the ability of the shoulder to come back. Now, if someone doesn't have this, their shoulders may come here, and they may end here, and they're not able to get in a nice straight up and down position. Or what you'll see is they're not able to completely lock out. Their elbows will be bent. So they'll be here, and you'll say, hey, lock out, and they'll go, I can't do it. And then I've seen some coaches go, well, you're full of it. You can do it, you're just not pressing hard enough. Well, if they press any harder, they're gonna start compensating at their back, and then they're gonna hurt their back. So the risk of injury here especially is either at the shoulders or at your back if you don't have a requisite amount of shoulder mobility. And again, if you can't get all the way to the top, it's obviously gonna be a lot harder to do the movement, right? All right, so we're gonna move now. Now we've covered the mobility portion. Is just doing a big mistake I see with a thruster is not going in the rack position. So David he went straight to the rack position. He went from overhead, and the bar went straight to his shoulders. So this looks really good, okay? So what happens a lot of the time is people don't go to the rack position. They just hold it right there. Now, there's two mistakes you can make. You can either do this, and then you could try to correct it by going to your shoulders, and too late, and that's still gonna hurt you. Or I see a lot of people, they do the entire thruster without racking the weight. So watch David do one of these like this. It doesn't look very pretty, is it? And if his elbow happens to smash into his knee, well, he might be able to say goodbye to those wrists, all right? Especially if he's loaded up with a good amount of weight, all right? So, most important thing here is the rack position on the squat. Let's go all the way to the bottom. He's also gonna stay nice and upright. So a lot of people fold over. They either lack strength or we go back to mobility. If they start folding over here at the bottom, it's gonna get really tough to breathe, all right? So try and stay straight up and down. David, can you fold over for me real quick? All right, if you look like this, no bueno, all right? You either need to work on that thoracic extension, that's that right there, or there might be something going on downline, ankles, hips, all right? So go ahead and stand up. The biggest limiter outside of mobility and proper technique on your thruster is normally gonna be your front squat strength. So if you have good technique and mobility, front squat strength is gonna give you the most bang for your buck. The last thing we're gonna go over on the thruster is the push press. Sometimes people can have, outside of mobility, they may not be very strong. I see this with more commonly with women. They may be able to pop those hips, bar gets about their forehead, and then they just can't seem to lock it out at the top. That seems to be the hardest part. If that's the case, you can do some things that help your pressing strength. We talk a little bit about that in the podcast with Max, all right? So, David, go ahead and give me like 3 really good strong thrusters just so people can see a good example. Boom. And notice as he passes parallel on the way up, that's when his hips really pick up speed and he's popping that bar off his shoulders, okay? It's not a front squat with a press. It's more like a front squat with a push press. Really drive hard. So go ahead and, yeah, really emphasize that hip drive. You can come up, pop.
Show what a bad one would be like?
What shows a bad one, David?
Separating the two.
There you go. That's definitely not a good one. Good. All right, so you can see the difference there. You can make it easier on your shoulders and your pressing by having nice hip speed. And a lot of times you're doing weight where there's no way you're gonna be able to press that many times, okay? All right, let's go ahead and put the bar down. We're gonna move on to pull-ups. First thing we're gonna address with this movement again, and with any movement you ever do, is gonna be your mobility, all right? Again, if you can't get that shoulder flexion we were talking about when you're going overhead with that, you probably don't belong doing kipping pull-ups hanging from a bar, okay? That's a really great way to mess up your shoulder. So first thing, if you have a hard time getting the barbell overhead, then don't do kipping pull-ups. Maybe some dead hang pull-ups or ring rows are gonna be more in order. We have a technique WOD just on pull-ups where we go over some of the scaling movements there, and you can see examples of things like ring rows. So if you don't have the mobility, I wouldn't do kipping pull-ups. All right. Now, if you don't have the strength to do a few dead hang pull-ups, I'd say 3 to 5 dead hang pull-ups, then you probably don't want to be knocking out 45 kipping pull-ups as fast as you can either, okay? So really get that requisite amount of pulling strength before you go throwing yourself around a bar, okay? Now, with the kipping, the mobility we're looking for specifically is the same as when we were doing the thrusters. When David got to the top of the thruster and say he couldn't straighten his elbows, or if he did straighten his elbows, he compensated at the back. If you can't do that with a barbell, you don't belong kipping on a bar from overhead, okay? So fix that first. Now, if you do have that amount of mobility and you do have that amount of strength, we're gonna just show you what kipping looks like. So David, go ahead and knock out some kipping pull-ups. So when you're doing these, it's really important to keep the core tight. He's not gonna get his legs all flailing around. His feet are gonna stay nice and close together, and he's staying nice and controlled. When he gets to the top, he's pushing away from that bar and then getting back into the kipping motion. All right, let me take a break. Yeah, more details on the technique WOD for pull-ups. Now, if you can do 21 pull-ups in a row, kipping, or you can do Fran 21, 15, 9 unbroken. That means you can just, every time you get the pull-ups, if you can do your pull-ups unbroken every time, then you might be ready to do the butterfly, all right? So butterfly pull-ups, if you're not strong enough to do them, can be hard on your shoulders, and I wouldn't do them every workout. There's definitely workouts where you want to do kipping, and then other workouts where you're practicing to go fast as butterfly. This is where you're really gonna separate, you know, making your Fran time go from 3 minutes to like 2:15, all right? So David, you wanna go ahead and knock out a few butterflies? Again, you can view more of these and a little bit of the explanation of how they work on the other technique WOD for pull-up specifically. Staying nice and tight here with his feet, driving with his hips. All right, thanks David. So last important thing is gonna be transition. You don't wanna, the obvious things, you don't wanna set your barbell up 100 yards from your pull-ups, right? And when you set down your bar, you might want to maybe maintain a little bit of control and don't let it scoot halfway across the ground, all right? You don't wanna ghost ride that barbell too much. As far as scaling goes, if you're not breaking, like if it's taking you longer than 10 minutes to do Fran, then you're a prime candidate for scaling, all right? So it may be the thrusters, it may be the pull-ups, it might be both. It might just be your wind. It's supposed to be a nice, short, intense workout. So a few ways to scale is just go lighter on the thrusters, all right? That's gonna be your main scale for that. The scale for the pull-ups are gonna be ring rows, banded pull-ups, jumping pull-ups. Any way you can make the pull-up easier. Now, once you start breaking 10 minutes with a scaled version, then you might want to move to that. As far as shoulder health goes, I am a huge fan of doing the ring row over any scaling of pull-ups, because most people need to get more horizontal pulling, and if you have a hard time getting overhead, the horizontal pulling is going to be a lot better for your shoulders, okay?
We have a technique WOD for that too.
We do have a technique WOD for that. All right. I don't think you may have heard CTP in the background, reminding me that we have a technique WOD on ring rows.
Horizontal pulling.
Horizontal pulling.
And ring rows.
And ring rows should probably be in there.
We have separate ones.
All right, guys. If you have any questions about Fran, you can go to barbellshrugged.com, click on Ask a Question, and if there's something I didn't cover, go ahead and hit me up there and let me know.
And we're back. We have Max El-Hag hanging out. We're talking about program design, and right now we're specifically talking about how to improve somebody's Fran time, this theoretical person who has been assessed, and we are now dissecting the workout, figuring out where their weaknesses lie, and then some things we might be able to do to shore them up. But first, make sure to go to barbellshrugged.com and sign up for the newsletter.
Well,
This guy, he's learning.
Already,
This
man.
guy's learning.
But first, they've already done that.
Not, if you didn't do it the first time, do it again. Yeah, and if you've already done that, just go to iTunes, give us 5 stars, leave a positive comment, and Chris Moore will give you a hug
That's all right.
through his
A virtual hug.
Virtual hug. I don't know. I'm trying to fill in for Chris Moore, and he's not here.
He claims that people feel all tingly when they get their virtual hug. So if you're feeling all tingly right now, that's what's
Chris
happening.
is thinking about you. All right. We finished pull-ups,
Yep.
and now we're moving on to the thrusters.
Yeah, so with thrusters, as with any weightlifting movement, there's a bunch of different things that can come into play and a bunch of different limitations. The most obvious one, and I think probably the first one that most people should deal with, is mobility. And if most coaches look at you do thrusters, they should be able to tell, even without biomechanical background, whether or not the movement is efficient. And the best way to do that is to find some of the best people doing whatever it is that you want to do and watch how they do it. And, Rich Froning squats straight up and down, even in his thrusters, which allows him to breathe and go up and down and sequence from the top of one rep down to the bottom. And most people that are good at thruster-based workouts have very efficient squat mechanics. Some things will come into play that might not allow people to ever look like that relative to what their limb length looks like. So if you have really long femurs and really long legs and a short torso, you might never look like that when you do thrusters. And then you just got to work with what you have to work with and just work on efficiency of movement with
Go
knee
play
tracking.
a different sport.
Yeah, or that.
Go play volleyball or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, the less your body mechanics fit that of a prototypical squatter, the more mobility you need.
Yeah.
So if you do have long legs, long arms, and a short torso, then you need even more ankle mobility, even more thoracic extension, even more shoulder flexion, range of motion to do those movements correctly.
I have seen some longer limbed guys surprise me. I was like, no way he can snatch.
Yeah.
And then, they've got long femurs and the shorter torso, and then they like yank it overhead and squat it out. I'm like,
Yeah.
wow,
Yeah.
they just had great mobility.
Yeah, and in the
It's
bottom
possible.
of the squat, their knees are like 8 feet in front of their toes. You're like, oh my god.
Yeah.
And then they stand up, and you're like, all right,
Yeah,
whatever.
looks good.
Yeah.
But on a general basis, make sure the movement looks right, because that's always first limitation, right? Efficiency of movement should be number one, which again is skill adaptation and not a program design necessarily fault. Then you have speed of the actual movement. Speed of the actual movement generally will only be if somebody's doing the reps unbroken again, because there's no real way to make the thrusters faster if they're doing them then unbroken than making each actual thruster faster. To improve speed of contraction, squat cleans, depth jumps, bounding, jump switch lunges, reverse shot tosses, pretty much any speed development program that you go on will have a carryover effect in many other patterns of motion. So you might do a hip extension speed cycle and all of a sudden find out that your squat went up because you're activating fast twitch fibers, and the body's complex and it's not only activating in like one pattern of motion when you're training.
Doing something like throwing a med ball.
Yeah,
like
yeah,
a
something
lot of people would
simple as
never
that.
connect those two.
Yeah.
But it could happen.
Yeah, for sure. So if you're doing the thrusters unbroken in Fran, and then, I'm assuming if you're still working on it, it's a pull-up issue. But if you get the pull-ups taken care of and then you're still wanting to improve it, the speed of contraction of the actual thruster reps can be done with speed squatting and thruster training specifically in that movement, and cycle time from top of one rep down to the start of the next rep. Some people have pressing strength issues with regards to thrusters, so they're like, man, I felt strong in the legs, but I just was failing to lock them out at the top of my reps, so I had to stop and drop it. So a simple thing for those people, just do standing press work and tricep accessory work to be able to improve something like Fran. So, that person might be in the gym doing bench presses, tricep extensions, weighted dips, and standing presses one day to improve Fran, because that is the weakest link in the chain to develop that specific workout. You have blood flow in the quads. A lot of people will, or really in the low back or the butt, a lot of people will get it localized in different places. And some of that I found really hard to train. When you constrict something at a high speed, a lot of times you're going to create more tension in the muscle and make it harder for the blood to get through the capillaries and get through all that stuff anyway. So usually if that's the issue, I do more aerobic based training, just to create the global adaptations that I'm looking for, which is like more capillarization, better slow twitch fibers. If it's low back, usually sometimes it's a mobility issue and they're getting hyperextended at the bottom, that I might say, hey, you got to target your hips and try to get rid of some of your pelvic tilt. And that's probably it with regards to the actual thruster. Then you have a combination of all of those with energy systems. So when I say energy systems, the comments like, oh man, like I was just so hot and I felt blood in my head and was disoriented, wasn't necessarily breathing heavy. Simple things like breath holding, that could be. If somebody has poor squat mechanics and it forces them to constrict really tight, even though it's only 95 or 65 pounds, and they're not able to breathe, and your blood pressure keeps going up because you're doing more and more work, and the central nervous system just kind of gets overloaded and makes you stop, drop the bar, breathe, calm down, blood pressure goes down, and then your brain's like, okay, you're good to go. So little things like that, it takes a coach to decipher, like, well, is that really an energy system limitation, or is it movement, or is it the actual squat mechanics, or what is it? But you got to play with protocols over time to be able to deal with that. But for the most part, it's not toughness training. It's not beating people up with volume to get them used to that feeling, because the brain in the face of that kind of healing, it might adapt a little bit, that it gets better at dealing with that, but it's not going to let your blood pressure get to a point where you have an aneurysm generally. So there is, which is where the central governor model of training comes from. It's Tim, should I go into that?
No, we don't need to go into that. I was about to stop you, actually.
Yeah, okay.
But we're going off on a tangent.
Okay,
there.
sorry. Yeah.
Not necessary.
Okay. And then respiration. If somebody's breathing out of control, you just need to, again, you think about, well, what's creating the respiration? Is it thrusters? If it's thrusters, is it mobility because they're getting bent over and their butt's getting scooted back and their chest is facing the ground, and they're holding their breath and not able to breathe, and their cycle time starts to slow down? So then it's not really an energy system thing. It's training the energy systems properly with good squat mechanics in the thrusters. Now, if everything is perfect and somebody's like, I have great mobility, I can do 50 unbroken pull-ups and 50 unbroken thrusters at whatever the Fran weight is, and they still can't do well on Fran, then I'm thinking it's actual respiration or energy system production. They either can't get oxygen to the working muscle cell, or they can't tolerate the fatigue substrates that come with lactate, or they can't endure they don't have lactic endurance, basically. And if I'm training those, I'm basically doing powerful intervals with a lot of rest recovery to allow each one of those sets of work added up to equal more volume than I would be doing if I were doing Fran.
So we give an example of that, like a specific example?
Yeah, so let's say somebody can do 50 unbroken thrusters and 50 unbroken pull-ups. I might say you do 5 sets of 20 unbroken thrusters and 20 unbroken pull-ups and rest 6 minutes. It's somebody who's powerful enough to do 50 unbroken and 50 unbroken of those two movements is probably going to need a good amount of rest. If somebody can only do 10 unbroken, they're doing intervals of 5 and 5, 5 minutes of rest might be a little overboard. So you have to titrate the rest relative to the response you're trying to get out of all of that work. But on a general basis, you're taking an amount of work and making it more powerful than the overall workout would be. So if somebody's doing 45 reps and 45 reps in 3 minutes, you want to pick a rep scheme that they're doing, maybe it's 10 and 10, that they can do well, I should do 15 and 15 because that'd be a third. So they should be doing 15 and 15 and faster than a minute. So that means that they're training more powerfully than they're going to be doing the actual workout. So you're actually training them to be more powerful. And slowly you start to titrate the rest down, deload them, build their volume up, and then retest it. And that's all theoretical. And some people that works really, really well. And some people you're like, man, that's weird. I would have thought you had done better based on the training volume. And then you have to just cross off the other potentials. Did you have a good night of sleep last night? Did you eat today like normal? Did you get in a fight? What was your training look leading up to this? And if you can cross all those things off the table, you need to go back to your original plan and restructure it.
How often do you have to do that? How often do you have to reassess and restructure?
Yeah, so test retest is athlete specific. The more beginner, the more I call it the organism, but that kind of takes the person out of it. So let's say the more the person is going to change.
Reading too much.
Too many biology textbooks.
Yeah. The more
Chris would have tried to kill you if you were here.
I feel like you need to have a real thick accent when you say the organism.
Yeah, it would fit my last name, but yeah. So the more the person's going to change on a regular basis. So a limitation model should always change, because as you're training weaknesses, at some point limitations should change if you're doing the right things. Some people will, let's say an ex-football player is 250 pounds, super, super powerful, pretty tight and not that mobile, not that great at gymnastics stuff, but can do anything under a minute really, really well. If that guy wants to compete in the sport of CrossFit, his priorities of respiration and gymnastics volume and longer workouts are always going to be a priority. Doesn't mean you don't still train his strengths and do, let's say
He's still going to squat.
Yeah, he's still going to squat, but it's just not like you have 375 pound power clean when you walk in the door.
Yeah.
Am I really?
Don't worry about it.
Yeah, and I'm like, okay, that's great. Yeah, cool. Do it once a week, once every 2 weeks. Just make sure that it stays within an elite range.
Maintain it, and then work on everything else.
Yeah. So, as you're training most people, especially beginners, they're rapidly changing. You're like, you put them on strength work and they put 20 pounds on in 4 weeks, and then they're like, oh, I don't do as well in longer stuff now. And I'm like, yeah, well, physics will tell you that you're doing 20 pounds more work with everything that you do. If you're doing a 20-minute workout that has 400 reps of something, you're doing a lot more work with your body. So now you might need to start training some of the long stuff and make sure you don't lose all the gains you got in the strength. And with CrossFit, it's very complicated because it's not just strength and endurance. It's strength, endurance, mobility, muscular endurance, skill development, and then under fatigue and with an infinite number of tests.
Don't forget neon.
So you never know what's being tested. So you have to come up with patterns of things that you see in most people. And in most beginners, you have skills as something that need to be developed, which again is not a remote program design thing, and you should have a coach for. You have strength that is an issue, and strength really only up to an issue if your target is something that requires you to be strong. So if you say, I want to do well in the opens, do you want to make it to the regionals? No, not really. It's not really something I'm ever going to be able to do. Okay, well, based on the last year's test, the heaviest things that we saw are really not that heavy. Now, if you only snatch 95 pounds as a guy or 60 pounds as a girl, strength is definitely a major priority.
Yeah.
But it's not like at some point you're going to develop a requisite level of strength, or you're like, okay, well, you're good enough. Like if you want to be a regional level athlete, your 185 pound snatch probably needs to go up a lot. But to be good at the opens, I'm not going to prioritize only that unless there's other things that people want. Because some people want to say, I want to do well in the opens, but I want my Olympic lifts to go up. Or I want to do well in the opens, but I want to be able to bench 400 pounds. Then okay, well, strength is always a limitation for that until we get that goal. And then relative to the opens, we have gymnastics, breathing, box jump capacity, all the things that we might see in the open come up.
So having written thousands of programs, what are the most common patterns you've seen for both men and women? What's very common?
Yeah, so for men, actually I'll start with women. For women, it's upper body strength. Generally now, as more elite females are coming to work with me, you're starting to see them with really good squat, deadlift, power clean, power snatch, clean, and power clean numbers. Where they're usually struggling is jerk, and if they have really good mechanics of the jerk and they worked with a good coach, that's not an issue. But push press, handstand push-ups, muscle-ups, chest to bar pull-ups, toes to bar, burpees and high volume actually is a surprising one. A lot of people, even at an elite level, you'll see they fall to the ground, they push their upper body up because it's a lot lighter than holding your midline and pushing your whole body up, and then they jump their hips and do a back extension and stand up.
That's what I do.
Yeah, I
actually just go elbows, then hands.
I just do the worm. I go down and then come back up without touching my hands.
Met the standard, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, for females, upper body relative strength. It's part of the sport that you have to equal the amount of work that a male's doing with their upper body, and females are going to be behind the 8 ball on that. So it's obviously going to be a pattern that I see very frequently. And how much strength work each female can tolerate is going to be different to who that person is, and what their joint structure is like and what their training background is like. But that's usually a big one. And then the short-term power. A lot of them, whether it's what they did for their background or just the physiology of who they are, they're pretty good in the longer stuff. Like the Metcons under lighter loads with high respiration rates, they're comfortable. They feel fine. They don't freak out. They don't lose their cool. Their pacing's relatively good. It's when you tell them you have to go. This workout's 3 minutes long. Like, you got to beat the next person. They finish. They're like, "Ooh, that was tough." And you're like, why couldn't you go faster? Like, I don't
what
get
happened?
it. Yeah. And they just literally don't have the training background and the nervous system to allow them to do that. So, for those people, a lot of times it's strength work that
those
lets
people,
that.
huh?
Those people.
It's strength work that helps develop that.
And for the guys, what's the most common thing? Or is there a common thing?
Yeah, I'd say for the guys, you have them split up in 2 categories. You have the powerhouses and you have the enduros. And I'd say it's probably equivalent. Most people that are fitness freaks, let's say before even the sport of CrossFit, or before CrossFit was on the radar for most people, you have the people at the Globo Gym who are either running or doing triathlons or hiking or mountain biking or doing the endurance-based activities, and then you have the meatheads, right? And that's kind of how it went for a long time. There were the people that were both gym rats, and some people who were like playing racquetball and running and biking and swimming, and then you had the other people that were like lifting weights or ex-football players. The hybrid has been starting to develop. So I think what I see as the pattern is those people that are getting into the sport are coming from both backgrounds. Ironically, the current elite had done something that allowed their training to hybrid the two. They either, I played water polo and then I lifted weights and powerlifted, or I did gymnastics and powerlifting and then triathlons. And they started to train both of the systems independently, and just happened when it came time to put them in the middle, they already did all their training correct leading up.
They already had a lot of volume.
Yeah, they had the volume of both sides already built up, so they just needed to put it together. They're like, I can breathe, and I do have a lot of capillaries, and my mitochondria works well, and I'm strong and explosive, and I have good strength capacity, so I can lift heavy stuff up over and over and over and over again, like strongman or whatever the case is. And that's where your elite is. So it's very rare to get that person to walk in my door, but when they do, I'm ecstatic because I'm like, okay, this is somebody that, you know, is going to flourish really fast. When you have somebody who's on the wings that needs to develop either pure power and strength because they are enduring, or pure endurance because they're really powerful, those adaptations on a general basis just take a little bit longer to develop. And you look at some of the strongest guys out there, like, oh, how long have you been training? 15 years. It was like, oh, no wonder you squat 600 pounds. Like,
do you find it's quicker to do one or the other? If you have an endurance background, it's faster to get strong, or if you have a strength background, is it faster to gain endurance?
Yeah.
Which one in the ideal world would you rather be coming in?
Yeah. I don't think there's one that adapts to the other faster, because I don't necessarily think that all the people that are doing one or the other are built to do one or the other. So some people that spent their whole lives strength training actually on the inside may not be that innately powerful. Yeah, they're presenting.
About me. Really? I was not supposed to be a strength athlete, but I did it.
Athlete.
That characteristic is a great thing to get in a CrossFit setting, because they did all of the hard work in the thing that they were weaker at already. So you just got to keep it there as you develop the thing that they're going to be a fast responder to. I actually just read a really good research article about genetic adaptation to aerobic training, and if genetics was the number one variable in dictating how well somebody responded to aerobic training, which I guess is kind of like common sense, but it's nice to hear, you know, science come out and say, like, well, you know, obviously this is happening in a lab setting, and we're seeing that, like, some people are just innately better at getting more enduring, and some people, no matter what they do or how hard they work, are going to have a ceiling that's lower than other people. So if you get somebody with a low innate ceiling that spent 10 years developing because maybe they didn't want to be skinny, so they spent 20 years putting on mass and getting strong, and then they come to your door and they're like, I want to be good at CrossFit now. And I'm like, man, your background's in strength training. It's going to take a lot to, like, you know, get you to be good at 5K runs and half marathon rows and all this stuff. And in 4 months, you're like, wow, you completely changed. And the same thing happens on the flip side, right? Somebody like big bone structure, you look at them, you're like, really, man, you did triathlons, but they're kind of slender, and then you do a little bit of strength training and they, like, put on 15 pounds of mass, and you're like, wow, you don't even look like the same person anymore. But it's because they developed whatever it was that they were innately not supposed to do. They developed it at a pretty high level. And then the other thing, they're genetically just faster at responding to. So I'd like to get that person. If I don't get somebody in the middle, I'd like to get somebody that's on a wing that they're not really supposed to be
But they're built to be the opposite.
You just got to shore up their strengths real quick, and then they're good. You don't have to, like, go about fixing their weaknesses for the next 5 years.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, I tell some people after a couple months of training that, you know, we have, and I think a coach's job is to help set athletes up for setting realistic and attainable goals for success and long-term development. Because if an athlete comes and says, I want to make regionals, and then a coach in his head is like, there's no chance, like, you're not even close, come on, like, the sport's growing, you finished 400th, and like, you're a beginner, and these guys have been doing this for years and have coaches and lifestyles to support it, and you say yes, at the end of the year when they don't do it and their dreams collapse, like, it's partially on your conscience for not saying, like, no, I'm not saying, like, you should be mean to them and be like, you suck, you'll never make it, but setting them up to say, like, look, well, you finished 400th, let's reach towards your potential, but let's set objective measures that say, okay, well, if you want to be good, and let's say you're weaker, let's have you improve your snatch by 30 pounds and improve the number of pull-ups you can do by 10 reps and improve this by this and this by this and this by this, and then do your best in the open and let's see where you fall. When you use a variable that you can't control as your barometer for success, and they have this really high level goal that might not be attainable, it's just really hard for the athlete to stay motivated and want to work hard long term. I know I probably get yelled at by some people where they're like, set your goals high and shoot for the stars, and then if you fall, and I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, I don't know. No matter how much training I do, I'm not gonna beat Rich off the podium, and I don't think that's an emotional issue or me, being not realistic. I just don't think that I have the genetics to do it, and athletes should know that. Doesn't mean that I'm not going to train to be my best. It just means that when I structure my training program and my goals and how I measure my success is going to be dictated based off all that.
Yeah, I like to base my goals off of my own performance, not off of what someone else did. It's like, well, he did it that fast, so I guess I got to now. And then setting goals that are attainable, I think is very important as well.
And it's really not an athlete's job to know what is attainable, because they shouldn't be spending all their time looking at data and analyzing results of other people and all this stuff unless they have aspirations to be a coach at one point, or unless they're in charge of their own training program. So if you're writing your own training program and you want to be the champ, you better be studying the people that are in contention to be the champ to know where you have to be in certain tests and where you're weak and where you're strong and where to deviate your time. If not, and you hire a coach, it's their job. And if you say, I want to win the games, and I say, I don't know if that's realistic, especially not in a short time frame, maybe that's a longer term plan, and the athlete sincerely believes that they can do it and they don't trust the coach, then that relationship right off the bat shouldn't be started, and he should find a coach that's going to believe in his goal and his mission. And if down the road those two get in a fight because he didn't make it, or that guy might make it and then call me up and be like, hi, I told you, idiot. And I'm like, all right, well, I'm sorry. I just made the wrong judgment call at the wrong time, but it is what it is.
Here, I want to change subjects real quick. A common question that I get, and I got this over Twitter a few days ago, was, since you're very well read, I'm directed at you, is what are some of your favorite resources for new CrossFit coaches? Like, give me like a beginner, maybe like an intermediate book or seminar, and then maybe like some more advanced stuff, since you've read and watched so many different books and so many different products.
So number one, I'd say barbellshrugged.com.
Shameless plug.
I like your style.
Well, first of all, I know that the governing body, when they put out a lot of their CrossFit HQ, when they put out a lot of their education, it's for mass consumption. So there's a lot of people that take it. But whenever you do anything, you should at least start at the source. So you should take the CrossFit Level 1 if you start to learn. You should learn from the people that created the system. You should learn about all the movements, what they believe. Now, it doesn't mean you have to take whatever they say as the word or as the absolute truth, but it's your starting point for disseminating information. So you should always start at the source. And then I'd honestly say that the internet is one of the best resources that you should use for any strength and conditioning. But you need to create an equal bias in whatever you go through in things that are going to be positive towards what you believe and then are going to refute that same idea. So if you read about strength training and let's say a prominent weightlifting coach starts talking about strength training and says, oh, if you want to get good at squatting and want to get strong, the only way to do it is clean and jerk and snatch and back squat and front squat with no reps and blah blah blah. You should listen to
I know some guys like that.
Who are we talking about?
I'm not going to name names, so go ahead and keep going.
You should read an equal amount of literature on the opposite end that says, well, if you want to get strong, you should use knee wraps and conjugate method and chains and bands and variation and whatever, so that you can see both sides of the spectrum and then start to play with them. First with yourself as a guinea pig, or with your athletes, or with your coaches. And then where I would send you...
I'm going to fill in for Chris Moore real quick and say that's just good life advice for anything. Be it strength training or not. Like, you should look at both sides.
Cool.
You're welcome, Chris.
And then I'd say where I would send you for information is relative to what you really want to accomplish out of this. Now, if you want to become the best athlete that you could possibly be, I would say that you want to limit the amount of technical knowledge that you get. I don't really have any science or anything to support that, but I've seen that a lot of the best athletes that I've coached really don't want to know what I'm doing or why I'm doing it. They don't want to know, you know, the negative downsides of having sugar when they have cookies, but they know they feel better when they do it, so they do it. They're way more instinctive and way less intellectual. I found that the most intellectual people about their own training over time limit themselves as athletes and then become wonderful coaches.
I would totally agree with that. I overthink all the stuff that I do, but I can coach everyone better. But I feel like I've gotten worse because I always have an excuse about why I shouldn't do something. 'Cause I'm like, well, that it wouldn't really make sense for me to do that.
Doug and I have talked about this many times.
Yeah.
Like, there's been times where we were training for anything, and it's like, I wish I didn't know this, because that guy over there in the corner who is just training his nuts off doesn't know shit. And he's going to do better than me because he's training his nuts off. Like,
That's right.
And the whole time I'm like in between sets, like contemplating like training theory and shit. And I'm like,
should I have put 5 more grams of sugar in my pre-workout shake? Because I feel kind of tired right now. Maybe I should stop. Maybe I shouldn't do this right now. I didn't really sleep very good last night.
Yeah.
And I got all these excuses, but 10 years ago, all I thought it was about was just effort and just grind it out. And if I was tired, it's because I was being a pussy.
Yeah, I have
that's right.
And I was in really good shape 10 years ago compared to now.
Yeah, I have
same story.
I have a philosophy that a lot of that we're talking about is the difference between belief and doubt. The smarter you get and the more knowledgeable that you get about things, the more you're doubting what you're doing. When you believe in what you do, you're just much more likely to succeed. You know, the most people that you talk to and you're like, what are you going to do in 5 years, that actually make it? They believed that in 5 years they were going to do what they're doing, right? If you asked Rich, are you going to win the games next year? He believed it when he said it, probably the year before he made it and won. And then the next year, and champions they have this belief, and a champion doesn't necessarily need to be number one. It might just be like, oh, I wanted to make the games.
Champion at life.
But I think a coach should instill belief in an athlete, but I think some of that is just innate. What people's background is and their self-confidence and all of that stuff, or their driving force in life. When it's belief in an athletic setting, I think it allows them to succeed a lot faster, and they don't think too much about like, oh, I got injured and maybe I was doing something wrong, I got to look back. They just go forward, right?
Yeah.
And then just keep moving. And I think that's a really important and missed aspect of athletes. And a lot of times I beg them, they ask me all these questions. I'm like, please stop asking. Like, do you want to be a coach? You want to be an athlete? I want to be an athlete. Then please stop asking. Now, it doesn't mean don't educate yourself. It means educate yourself up to a certain level so that you can be competent as an athlete. But don't educate yourself past that point, because then you're going to start to try to coach yourself and coach yourself potentially in a wrong direction, right? Like you might feel, oh, I feel bad today, and I'm gonna just take it easy. But maybe an outside observing coach might say, yeah, he feels bad today, but he's supposed to feel bad today, so we're gonna give him more volume for a couple days and then deload him for a week or something.
Like they know just enough to screw it all up.
Yeah, for sure.
You guys sent him that article from Dan John called Coach Said So? You ever seen that before?
No, I didn't. I'll look it up.
There's a lot of value in that, where just Coach said so. Just go do it.
Yeah,
Don't overthink it. Just follow the directions of the coach, and you're not supposed to think about it. Your job is just to do.
I've had a lot of athletes. They're like, man, I feel really bad today. What's wrong? I'm like, nothing.
Yeah.
You're in the third week, loaded up. Like, you should feel not great, because next week we're taking a big break.
Yeah.
We're gonna unload, and you're gonna feel amazing at the end of that. But we're gonna dig a hole first.
Yeah, for sure. And then for coaches, I'd say that academia is a good place to start. You should read research. You should read textbooks. You should know a little bit about the endocrine system, a little bit about the nervous system. If you want to be a coach and some of the things that I talk about are like, wow, that's way over my head, I don't know what he's talking about, go get a book in it, or go on the internet. Wikipedia is amazing resource, and you should be able to disseminate information, good and bad, on the internet again. And if you read Wikipedia and then you read 50 other resources and you're like, oh man, these are all like contrary, then just do some more research. Find an expert, find an endocrinologist, find a friend who knows somebody who's endocrinology, and just start to get a baseline education and all that. You should have at least a base level knowledge in all of the disciplines of CrossFit. So powerlifting, gymnastics, weightlifting, endurance training. Anything else that I'd add? Maybe depth jumping and any plyometric work. But that's more for like a program designed to keep people safe in CrossFit versus it is improving the vertical, because I don't think you really can improve the vertical at a high level in CrossFit because there's too much volume. But that's just a personal thing that I've seen at a high level. Now you could do it at a 5 workouts per week level and improve almost all characteristics of fitness. But at the highest level, I don't necessarily see the high-end power coming out of athletes that much. And then private certifications, right? OPT has them. Barbell Shrugged has education. Czech Institute, Polican Institute, Functional Diagnostic Nutrition. They're all out there. A lot of them are expensive, and as you start to take them and get into them, you're going to see a lot of the same knowledge. But until you're in them and you're learning from those people, then you don't know what's good information and what's bad information, and then more at that point is better. The first courses I started taking, I sat in there and I probably retained about 10% of what was said. The other 90%, all I did was take notes about topics that I needed to research because I wasn't up to speed with the other people that were doing what I wanted to do. If they were coaching and I wanted to coach and they knew more than me, I thought I need to know all of that stuff because I can't be worse than them if I want to get to that level or better. So I read books in all of those aspects. And then slowly you're going to start to know, like, well, where do I want to kind of niche together? Do I want to be a strength coach, or do I want to be a CrossFit coach, or an educator, or a gym owner, or group training design person? And advanced program design is a lot of science. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have all the science to be great at program design, but you should have a basis of all of it to be solid. And some people just hate that. So if that's the case, just don't go down that path. Just think of something else, and maybe you're a movement expert and you work on movement efficiency and mobility and soft tissue work and become a massage therapist, and you just kind of find your path within coaching. So I guess from a resource perspective, that's kind of how I'd target people: athlete, coach, general fitness enthusiast, and read everything you can. I'd say probably stay away from courses other than if they're just like entry level and basic, just to get a feel for it. But I wouldn't say waste your money on really expensive courses if you're not really going to use it to give back, or you don't have this like thing in the back of your head that says, maybe I'm going to do this at a high level, or maybe I'm going to be a coach. If you're just enthusiastic about it, there's a ton of books, a ton of online resources, a ton of podcasts, and you'll get plenty of information from all of those to keep you enthusiastic in fitness for as long as you want.
Yeah, I'd keep on finding more books to read.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've only been looking for books for 16 years. So
yeah.
But I'm a slow reader.
Yeah, we're never.
I gotta sound it all out. It's tough, man.
That's right. Battery's dying. We got to close up shop. Battery's dying.
I will end this when I want to. CTP.
You're gonna end it no matter what when the battery dies.
All right, guys, we're gonna wrap this up. Thanks for coming out, Max.
Thanks.
Anything you want to plug?
I guess if you want anything coaching, I have some things I'm working on. So hopefully I'll be back on a podcast in a couple months or however long to have the website up. But if you want anything in the meantime, my email is my name coach@gmail.com. So MAXELHAGCOACH@gmail.com. Hit me up, questions, consultations, coaching, anything you need.
Cool.
Sounds good. If you're watching this episode right away, right when it comes out, then the 6-month Muscle Gain Challenge just opened up registration. So if you want to get on this,
Like 2 days ago, right?
yeah, if this comes out on a Wednesday and registration opened up on Monday,
You're
so
probably too late.
you might be too late. It might be sold out at this point, but probably not. So if you want to check that out, go to muscle.barbellshrugged.com and you can read all about the Muscle Gain Challenge. If you're watching this in the future, depending on what time of year it is, the program may be closed, for a short period of time until we open up the next one. So either way, go there, and either if it's open, you can sign up. If it's not open, then you can put your name on the waiting list, and we'll let you know when the next program is coming up.
And if you get on the waiting list, don't you get some kind of preferential something?
You get a little gift, a free gift from me to you.
Oh.
I know. I send you a very, very heartfelt video to educate you on how to gain muscle mass. So go to muscle.barbellshrugged.com, put your name and email in the box, and you can get a cool video.
All right, guys, don't forget to follow us on or like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and make sure to sign up for that newsletter so we can inform you of all the stuff that we forget to talk about here. Oh, yeah, real quick, we will have Brian McKenzie on in a couple weeks. And if you're in the Memphis area on September 22nd, 2013, we will be doing our first live audience podcast. So look forward to that. You should be able to find that on the barbellshrugged.com website under events.
Thanks for coming out, Mac.
Thanks for having me.
Tater tots.